Grad Clinic. We are covering all the things that you need to do to thrive and succeed, and all the things that are too often left to the side that we just don't talk about. We just don't teach our students in universities. Today, we're going to give you our top tips, and we're going to cover our worst mistakes and biggest fails as we have tried to network throughout our careers. I'm joined in the studio by Professor Courtney McNamara, who's also one of our coaches in the Fast Track program. And we also have our special guest, Greg Martin, who's the editor-in-chief of Globalization and Health. And I just want to dive straight in. So let me put both of you on. Really excited to have you join us. Greg, tell us about one of your biggest wins networking. How did it come about? What did you do?
Well, David, great question, because I had a very interesting, I stumbled into a win once, and it was a win just by virtue of just being a little bit brave and a little bit gutsy. This is way back in, it must have been sort of 2001, 2002. I was doing an internship at the WHO. So in other words, I was at the bottom of the food chain, below the bottom of the food chain. And I shot an email off to the very top of the food chain, to Derek Yak. At the time, he was the executive director for non-communicable disease. He was one of the 5 candidates to be the new DG at the WHO, certainly a busy man. I shoot him an email saying, hi, Greg Martin, do you have time to meet me for a cup of coffee? I'd love to get some advice. Not thinking I'd ever hear back from him. Well, within seconds, email pops back, says, well, if you're here at 7 a.m, I can fit you in for 5 minutes for a chat. And I was like, wow, didn't expect that. Went and met with him. Great meeting. Really nice guy. At the end of it, he gave me his card. He said, look, reach out to me if I can help with anything. I hung on to that card. I just left him alone because I didn't want to bug him, and I didn't really have any need to get in touch with him. But a few years later, at least 2 or 3 years later, I, at that point, was wanting to start the journal Globalization and Health. I was struggling to get support for the idea, shot an email to Derek. He emailed me back immediately, straight away, saying, great idea, let's do it together. He was my co-editor-in-chief, and that was the beginning of the journal, which I've now been the editor of for nearly 20 years.
I never knew that story. That's amazing. Just planted that one seed, email shot in the dark, and
Yeah.
then it grew into this beautiful tree. And then the position you're currently in. That's amazing, Greg. Courtney, I want to come to you. Tell us too about one of your biggest wins. Did you mean for it to happen? How did it come about?
Yeah, so I have a sort of similar story that I just kind of went for a whim, and it ended up working out to my advantage. So I was at a conference and trying to track some of the senior colleagues that were there. And eventually I was just sitting, this is like the social aspect after the conference, and everyone's sitting around having a drink or a beer or something. And essentially, I got my first postdoc from a 15-minute conversation at this sort of social affair after the conference, just sitting down, talking to someone I had never talked to or met before this conference. So
that's amazing. And look, this really sets the stage. I mean, Courtney, both you and Greg, incredibly accomplished, incredibly successful, and both of you would credit a huge chunk of that success to these networking experiences. I mean, we sometimes put so much energy into studying, doing all the right things with our research, and yet that there's that magic of the network. And one of the things I often say is that a large majority of your positions, about 90% of people report that they got their position not from a first order contact, but a second order contact in their network. And you both are really some fantastic examples of how these networking opportunities really can come to bear fruit. Maybe not even immediately, but down the road as a postdoc or even setting up a journal. I want to step back. We're going to go through a lot of really good things in this session. I'm excited about it. And you're going to want to stick around to the end, because I'm going to share one of my top tips that have really helped me. It's helped me get grants. It's helped me build my research team. And I wish I would have known this before, because it would have saved me a lot of time and frustration. And I was just stumbling around, kind of like a pigeon, not knowing where I was going when I was trying to network at conferences before. So you're going to feel really good and have a plan for building your network as an asset in your life after this session. So let me step back and have some introductions, because I mentioned you're both incredibly successful. You're also quite modest. Courtney, Professor McNamara, you've just started a position at Newcastle. Tell us a little bit about where you're at now.
yeah, so officially I don't start for another week. So my official date is on July 1st. But yeah, I'm starting my first permanent position at the University of Newcastle, coming in as a lecturer in public health. So far before this, I did one postdoc after my PhD, and then I won a large research grant. I spent 4 years doing that, or should have spent 4 years doing that. I've cut it now in the middle at 2, and am moving over to Newcastle now.
Okay. So stepping back, just as kind of going back was not too long ago that you were a graduate student.
Yeah.
Did you have an approach to networking? Is it something you stumbled into, or
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about how that fit
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, so some things I definitely stumbled into accidentally. So when I finished my master's degree, I was trying to stay on top of things in the field and trying to figure out what I wanted to do after that. So what I did was start a blog. And so I started writing some posts. The blog was called Healthy Policies. I was writing about the social determinants of health. And then eventually I started opening up the blog to contributions from people outside. And then I started going to some senior scholars and asking them to contribute to the blog. And actually, some of the best relationships I have today are from people that I reached out to at that point. So that was sort of an accidental way of getting to know some senior colleagues. But I think um, now I would probably translate that into some advice about reaching out and interacting with people maybe on Twitter. I don't think everyone should go and start a blog. But definitely there's ways to reach out to more senior colleagues. My other sort of more what I what I knew that I should do, or what I was very um, cognizant of, was going to conferences and seeing who the senior colleagues were there, and actually being very purposeful to have a chat with them. And if I knew what they were going to be presenting about, or if it was a book launch and they were going to talk about their book, I would prepare questions in advance, and
That's a
that's always worked out really well.
That's a really good tactic. I want to come back to the conferences. I just want to briefly come over to Greg. If you could tell us a little bit about you. I think you're a bit like me, that we did grad school back in the prehistoric period. But tell us a bit for you, as you kind of look back on your career so far. How has networking fit in? How does it relate to where you're at now?
Well, I'd say, I mean, this is a great topic, by the way, David, because I really think networking in my career has definitely been an important part of every step that I've taken. Very often, even just seeing that next step in your career is a function of your network, and people talking to you, reaching out to you, and saying, "Hey, there's an interesting opportunity here," or "Hey, we need somebody to step into a role." But it's that network, it's those relationships, it's that human contact that, in my opinion, most often translates into that next best opportunity. Very seldom is your next step in your career, or the next move, or the next grant, or the next whatever you're going to do, just a function of you, pen and paper, finding something on the internet, applying online, just sending it in cold. I mean, that may have success some of the time, but I think more often it's personal relationships that steer you in the right direction. If you've got those relationships, those human conversations with people, you're much more likely to understand the nuances of an ask. If you're putting in a grant application, or you're applying to do a PhD program, or even down to kind of a good example is people are submitting papers to globalization and health. Now, sometimes people reach out to us ahead of submitting the paper because they've taken the trouble to reach out to us as human beings, not just as kind of just some electronic journal in the sky. And they say, is this paper appropriate for your journal? Or do we need to tweak what it is that we're trying to say so that it's more kind of consistent with what the journal, the sort of raison d'etre of the journal? And we often give them feedback, and then they make a submission, which is much more likely to get through the peer review process than if they just sent in a cold submission. So I'm not encouraging, you don't have to, every time you publish a paper, reach out to the editors. I think that would, we'd all fall over with the sheer volume of emails. But the point is that when people do that, it definitely adds value to them and to us.
So that personal touch in the network really matters a lot. I think sometimes it's really easy to slip into the thinking, I'm a PhD student, I'm a postdoc, or even stage as a professor, that I need to invest in my intellectual capital. It's the skills and resources. If I'm a really good researcher, things are just going to come my way naturally. And unfortunately, kind of what you're both pointing out, it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
I remember being told in grad school that spend your 20s getting all that intellectual capital, but then start slowly investing more and more in social capital, because those networks are really what's going to get your intellect, your research in front of the right people, and
Yeah.
even grow your research. So I love that you're pointing that out, because I just don't think it's something we pay attention to. It's something we don't take seriously enough. And sometimes it feels a little bit
Yeah,
awkward.
yeah.
I feel a little strange thinking, well, this feels like something that the people in the business community go do. I'm not going to just with this intention of networking, and it makes everything feel very contractual. Have you ever had any feelings like that, Courtney? I remember I used to be allergic. Oh, if someone's talking about networking, oh, that just doesn't feel like me as a researcher. Did you ever have any
Yeah.
of those feelings or
Well,
experiences?
I often had feelings, I think, that were closer to like imposter syndrome, like
Hmm.
who am I to reach out to this person? Um, but I think like Greg said, like sometimes when I've reached out to journals, and this is something that I've recently started doing, and I wish I had been doing it before, is that you see the human side of things. Like when you're submitting through this online system, it can be very easy to be a little bit like overwhelmed, or I don't know, it's just you feel a bit disconnected. But then when you write and you're talking to the editor, you realize this is just a person on the other side of this computer screen
Yeah.
in this system.
Yeah.
And it's the same, like as soon as you start, of course, talking to somebody, of course, it breaks through and you get this a human connection, and it helps to deal with that sort of imposter syndrome feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And Greg, I'm kind of curious about your experience with email, shot in the dark. So some people might have those feelings like learning, well, who am I to email this top person in the field? Did you do the same thing perhaps with others and maybe just didn't get a response? Did you get demoralized? What happened?
Yeah, I've definitely done this the right way and the wrong way, and kind of learned through trial and error. But I think, I've stumbled into kind of what I think of as a little formula for network, doing sort of using electronic media to network. This is what I do. Like whether this is good or bad, it's up to you to decide. But I think you identify somebody that you think you'd like to be in contact with professionally. In the first instance, if I think, let me try and I want to get in touch with this person, I would send them a short email. Because if they're getting an email from a stranger and it's long, and especially if they're a senior person and their inbox is full, immediately they're going to be like, oh God, I'll come back to this when I can, or just skip right over it because people are busy. It's a short email, much more likely to be read. That's number one. Number two, include a question. So it gives them something to respond to, and make it an easy question to reply to, right? Not like, what is the meaning of life, like come back to me in a week. But something, and a good way to ask a question is to demonstrate that you've taken an interest in what they do. So like, I read a paper that you wrote and I was wondering. So it's stroking their ego, like you've read their paper, you're interested in work that they've done, they've had an impact on your life, that everybody wants to be the hero, right? Now they're reading your email, they're interested. You come in with a nice intelligent question that's been thought through. They're like, interesting. And something that they can send a short reply to. Because in that first email, you're not wanting to chew up their time. You just want to, and then they send a reply, you say thanks and leave it alone for a while. Because you're not buddies now, you're just kind of professional contacts.
Right.
And then in a little while, in the second communication, a good idea is not to be ask them what you want that email to be about, how you think you can help them, as opposed to the other way around. So if you're a junior person kind of trying to get your foot in the door, you could offer to do like a systematic review for them. Or, if it's not in the academic field, if it's in the sort of professional world, you could say, I'm available to do consulting work if you need anybody, I'm a pair of hands. But you're offering to be helpful, as opposed to, do you have a job for me? Or, like, and then keep that communication up periodically, but not too often. And I think that's a great way to kind of cement some sort of ongoing professional relationship.
That's really really valuable advice. I love that, Greg. By the way, I'm just going to use this opportunity to say, if you haven't already, join our Facebook group, and we actually go through and I take on some real emails from students trying to get in touch with me and dissect the good and the bad and the ugly of those emails, and it illustrates a lot of the elements that Greg's saying. I mean, you need to make that cold approach, that contact, about them more than about you. And so I really, really like that. And that cold approach can be kind of difficult if they don't know you already. Sometimes I recommend students to start with warmer approach, and since somebody maybe who's already in your institution or a professor in your class, or as Courtney said, maybe you're at a conference and you can ask a question. That's a little bit warmer than just an email coming out of the blue. When I've got thousands of emails drowning me in my inbox every day, then yours has got to somehow stand out. But I really like that. Courtney, do you want to share some things as well that for
Yeah.
in that vein have worked? And then I want to come to, after that, I want to come to a little bit more on strategy and tactics for networking. But yeah.
Yeah, so like Greg, I think I've done this sometimes the right way and sometimes the wrong way. So as a grad student, before I was doing my PhD, I reached out to a couple scholars who were doing things in the area of my master's thesis, just asking them, like Greg said, like short, little, simple questions, and they responded back to me. And then when I actually finished my project, I sent them my thesis. And this was a nice way to sort of keep the connection with them. But actually, they ended up like now my master's thesis is cited in these like nice articles elsewhere. What I did wrong is I probably took it a step too far one time, not knowing during my time in my master's degree, not knowing really how to go about to publish an article. I had then followed up with one and asked if they could help me publish this article. And the reply I got was sort of, well, this is something I do for my students. It was a little bit too much of an ask for them to train me and to go through this, the whole training about how to get something published. But otherwise, the sort of like asking them something, giving them something, my thesis was related to their work. So I think they appreciated having that sort of connection.
Yeah, and it's really a fundamental principle, and this is one of the strategies I want to bring out on that, Courtney and Greg, you're both speaking to, that is reciprocity. That you don't want to go to people just as a mendicant saying, please, Greg, in your case, please, Derek, can you help me? Or Courtney saying, oh, please, I want something. Instead, both of you went and were offering something valuable, whether that's your support, working for them for free, or in your case, Greg, it was, hey, we've got this cool idea for a journal, or Courtney, hey, would you want to have this outlet for your important work? You're offering them something rather than just asking them, saying, oh, please, please, please. So I really like that with reciprocity. The other thing I think I get from both of you is that you actually have a plan, and sometimes you've stumbled into it, but having a plan, taking seriously, just like you might have a plan for your research trajectory and goals. A lot of the things about networking, it's hard to see kind of the cause and effect. Well, I did this and I got an immediate benefit. It's kind of investing, planting seeds that may come to fruition later in exciting and unexpected ways. But having a plan about how you're going to actually approach building your network. If you don't have a plan for building that social capital, I'd encourage you to already start making one. Already started thinking about, or you may have some strategic people who would just be your dream mentor. Already start having a plan. How can you begin to engineer that? How can you make that happen? How can you, if you know they're going to be at a conference, how can you be there, be in the front row, and ask a great question? I want to come to conferences, but I think one of my biggest regrets as a grad student is when I first went to conferences, I didn't really have a plan. I had some newly minted business cards, and I thought I was just going to hand out business cards to everybody. And then kind of after the conference, I saw something lying on the floor, and I felt a little bit sad. I had no plan, and I was terrible at it to begin with. And flash forward now, it's something that I routinely and consistently invest in. What about you, Courtney, Greg? Did you have a plan when you approached your networking back then? Do you wish you did?
So something that I wish I'd done better earlier, but I started doing kind of probably about mid-career, was especially in the context of a conference, right? I remember being at a conference in DC, and I did a little bit of what you were talking about there, David. I dished out business cards, but I also collected business cards. I had this big pile of business cards. But for the first time, what I did is at the end of every day, on each of the cards, I quickly made a little note just at the back of the card, like this person was interesting because and how it is that whatever they were thinking or doing kind of connected in with professionally what I was trying to do, or where the overlapping interest was, or just what it was about that. Because I didn't just collect cards. Obviously, you speak to people, and you have a quick conversation. But a week later, you're going to forget that conversation, and then you're just going to have some card, and you're going to be like, "Well, I'll stick this in my Outlook contacts and forget about it." But now I had like a little bit of why this person was interesting to meet, and how it is that I thought they might be interesting, kind of professionally going forwards. And then I made the effort. I put all of their email addresses and phone numbers into my Outlook address book, but in the notes section, I put the note in. I said like this, met them at such and such conference, and we talked about blah, 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 blah. So then when I reached out to them later, and I actually did get in touch with a lot of those people down the line, I said, hey, we met in DC at the Global Health Conference. We talked a little bit about this, and I just wanted to keep that conversation alive. And I just found making that little note just translated into some professional relationships that have stretched out over like 20 years.
Wow. Wow. Just that little step is so true. I've done that so many times. Go to the conference and have the business card, scratch my head. What was this? Who was this person? Especially when you don't have the visual. I'll say I've taken that to a next level. Just to remind myself, I'll sometimes send a very quick email then and there because it's much easier with the smartphone. When I was going to conferences, I didn't have have a smartphone. Now I'll simply spend immediately an email with a little bit of that note in there so that I can easily follow up the conversation afterwards. Courtney, what about you? I love hearing these micro stories. Um,
Yeah, I was very intentional when I went to conferences to really, I think it's a lot easier to just go and hang out with the other PhDs or the other post-grad students.
mm,
And what's funny about that is that usually happens. Like, it's usually the early careers are kind of all hanging out together, eating together, and then often the more senior colleagues are like alone sitting drinking a coffee by themselves or something. So I would always make a point to just go and hang out and sit and talk to them. Um, and like I said, sometimes I would prepare in advance if I could, like a question if I knew the paper that was going to be presented, because I'm the type of person that I need to sit with the information and think about it. So I'm not the type of person at a conference that right away I'm going to raise my hand with a question. I kind of like to sit with it. So to prepare and knowing that about myself, then I would go in with prepared question. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that part about having a plan going in, and I do think my first conferences. I remember going to American Public Health Association for the first time. I was just stumbling around, and inevitably, I gravitated to some of the more students and others because that just felt a little safer and a little more comfortable. Where I think what I should have done is considered myself, and there's a bit of imposter syndrome as well there, to treat myself, think of myself as I'm a player at this conference. And I think it really helps as a conference if you're presenting, because then you're not just a participant, but you often get a different badge and you have a different level of recognition that comes with that. And you can try to force yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone and go engage with some of the faculty. And you'd be surprised at how, if you've done your homework, you're prepared, you know who they are, how easily you can strike up a conversation.
The other thing I'd say, David, is don't discount the networking with your peers. In other words, the people that are at your level as well. So we often want to network with the sort of senior, sort of the big hitters, and of course that's useful. But especially if you're young and you want to play the long game, somebody at your level, if you develop a friendship with them in 20 years time, they're going to be somebody senior that you're going to want to be in contact with. And there's an opportunity. And I certainly, and again, just to think back to that internship that I did at the WHO, that was in 2001, this is 20 years ago. I made friends with other interns at that stage, all of us, bottom of the food chain, less than the bottom. All of those people have gone on to do amazing things. We're still in contact, and it's turned into a very useful professional network. 20 years down the line, these people are directors, and they're all sorts of very senior positions. And it's great to be on a first name basis. Can phone them up anytime, day or night, and I've got that network. So if you want to play the long game and you're relatively young, make friends with up and comings, and that'll pay dividends down the line.
I love that. It's hugely important. I mean, I can see it now to the collaborations I have. It's called a cohort effect for a reason. That those people who are your contemporaries go on to occupy very prominent positions and play a key role. By the way, it's just another cheeky plug for our group, Fast Track Grad, which is a great place to build your network. And one thing I really love about it is how interdisciplinary it is. We have a lot of people from public health, doctors, nurses as well, but people who work on the environment. We have engineers, people in education, and it's truly a space that's judgment-free to support you and help you do the things you need to do to really thrive in your career as a grad and beyond. I'm just going to take a few comments from the group, and I want to come back to a few more of our tips. I want to say, okay, we've got several who are saying they appreciate your real life experience and example, Courtney. Really nice. And I mean, this is the real deal, real stories of how it works. Academic network, always a great source of inspiration, illumination for strengthening scientific aspects, 100%. And Rana also goes on to say it's all about proper and purposeful communication. Yeah,
Yeah, that's it.
and 100%. I mean, this is just that's the secret sauce. Is the magic formula also for communicating your research. If you can't articulate it to your network, it's gonna be really hard to articulate it to the general public or politicians or others whom you might want to influence as a result of your work. One thing I do want to add as well, that it took me a little while coming back to the imposter syndrome conversation. It took me a while to do this, but in networking, talking with others, um, it became very hard for me to be bold and let other people know what it is I want. And Greg, think your examples. I love coming back to that because you're very clear. I want to start a journal and let people know. And how do you feel about that? Is that too in your face? Is it asking too much? Or how did you deal with that? And how did you
I
overcome your fears with that?
I think you know where I'm seeing that the principle of what you're talking about, where I'm seeing it kind of most relevant to my career at the moment, is I'm finding people that are maybe one or two kind of steps behind where I am in their careers. So they
Mm,
might be in their sort of in their 20s or 30s or early 40s, like a bit younger than me, and might be wanting to reach out to me for advice, or and it's partially a function of because I'm on YouTube and stuff. So there's a little bit of visibility. Um, and I'm always happy for people to reach out to me. I mean, I love it. But I find when people reach out to me and they're very clear about what it is that they want, it just helps me. I'm like, I can help you. Like you're asking a very specific question.
yeah.
Let me see what I can do. Some of the times, people send me stuff. There's two things. If it's vague, it's difficult for me to engage. I'm not quite sure what's being asked, and then just kind of reflect back on what I said earlier. If it's a first introduction, first email, and it's long, I'll often kind of be like, I'm in a hurry, and I won't be reading it carefully, and I might miss something in it that's important. So keep it short and be very specific, and I think that like goes a long way to getting people to respond.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a premium on that. And that links to a question, Courtney. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in there very quickly. Did you get any rejections from the seniors you reached out to? I mean, I often didn't get rejections. I just didn't get an answer, and
Yeah,
that
exactly.
the email was too long. I didn't make it about them. I wasn't familiar with their work. It was too vague. So I really love what you're saying, because that question about the rejection, I've had lots that weren't active rejections, just no response. And I think a lot of that was because I was just too vague and I wasn't really being clear about what I was after and how this person I was trying to reach out to was the right person to contact for that thing. Um,
Yeah, I
Courtney,
think,
I see you got some experience
yeah.
too.
Yeah, most of my rejections haven't been outright either. It's just like a non-response. And I think I used to take that as again, it would sort of feed my imposter syndrome monster and be like, what was I thinking? Like, of course, they're too busy to read an email from me. But more recently, I just follow up the email. And of course, they're just human. And like you said, you have 1,000 things in your inbox. So I've just followed up politely with another email. Have you had a chance to consider the below? Like,
Mm,
really looking forward to hearing from you. And then, like, 9 times out of 10, people have
yeah.
responded back, like, oh, I'm so sorry. I missed your email. Like, yes, let's chat. So I think it's important, again, to consider that like human factor in things, and yeah, just remembering to make that human connection.
Yeah, I just
Isn't
want to.
isn't this a little bit like dating? I mean, I haven't see the whole dating world. I never lived in the whole swipe left and right story, so I don't actually know how that works because I'm married with kids. But the the networking, there might be something. It's a little bit of a numbers game as well,
Yeah,
in that you reach out to someone, they don't get back in touch. Not the end of the world. You know what I mean? Like, take it, move on. There's lots of fish in
Yeah.
the sea. You know what I mean? It's got to be a little bit like, when you're young and single and dating and you're swiping left and right or whatever they do nowadays. You just kind of, it's a little bit of a numbers game too, I'm guessing.
yeah. Absolutely. I think of it, Greg, as planting those seeds that you don't know if it's going to grow up to be a beautiful fig tree or plant later on. And some of those seeds aren't going to land, or they're going to get swooped away by birds or blown away in the wind. But I like that with dating also, because you really are trying to build a relationship out of nothing. And you wouldn't just, if you just met somebody on the street, you wouldn't be asking them for a whole bunch of things. You'd kind of start a little bit more softly and try to strike up a conversation and get to know a little bit about them. So yeah, I like that dating analogy a lot, actually. I think it really works. I wanted to say just on imposter syndrome, because not everybody may be familiar with that, but they may have experienced what it feels like. It's this feeling of you don't really belong, or that you're not good enough. And this is really incredibly common among grad students, to such an extent that some even might feel like, oh, they're going to find out about me and kick me out of the program because I'm just a fraud, and I shouldn't have even been here in the first place. And it's tremendously common. Something I hear over and over from grad students. Is something we don't talk about, and it's really a big barrier to you making the most out of the opportunity of the investment you're making in yourself. And it really comes to a head on networking, because then you might not feel good enough to access opportunities or access the contacts in front of you because of it. So if you've had any of those feelings, I'd really encourage you to get in touch with myself or with Courtney, and link with us in the Facebook group, because we have some really valuable training on imposter syndrome. Because until you get that right, it's going to hold you back in your research, it's going to hold you back in your networking, in all areas of your life. So just wanted to put that back in there. Yeah, and Rana also pointed out too, introverts find it so hard to network. And I'm so glad, Rana, that you mentioned that, because I think by nature, I'm quite an introvert, that I've just kind of forced myself to be an extrovert. And I think maybe 10 years ago, I would have really struggled to speak on camera in front of other people like this. Courtney, I have a feeling you might be able to relate to that too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think, but there's ways to still, I mean, to work with what you are and still get the things done you need to do. So I'm definitely an introvert, but that's also why I would prepare questions in advance. It makes it a lot easier also to talk to senior colleagues, like again at the conference situation, when they're just there by themselves drinking a coffee. It's much easier to have a conversation one-on-one, I think, probably if you're an introvert. So there's ways to do it. And then also now, like with social media, I mean, there's ways that you can really get on people's radar and communicate with them, like for instance on Twitter. And that's a nice way for an introvert to do some networking, for instance.
I like that. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah. I find LinkedIn to be just a completely like invaluable resource. I use LinkedIn all the time. The only downside of LinkedIn is it used to have a feature, but it's gone, where you could organize your contacts into categories and groups. And it's again within LinkedIn, I sometimes lose track of who fits into what group, because I'm interested in global health, but I'm also interested in AI and health, and then I've got my public health stuff here, which is health protection, and all of these different people that I know for different reasons are all kind of clumped together. So that's a little bit annoying in LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is a great place to get in touch with people, because just about everybody in a professional context, the sorts of people that I might want to be in touch with, they all seem to be there. And I find, again, 9 times out of 10, if I send in a request to connect in, most people are like, yeah, sure, we can connect. And then you're in contact. You can send a little message. And so, yeah, I find LinkedIn amazing in terms of social networks and being in contact with people. And you can see what they're about. And you can kind of, it makes it easier to send an intelligent question, because you can see papers that they've written, and you can, download one, give it a quick read, shoot them an email. So LinkedIn is great.
Tactically, Greg, I mean, you talked before how you had emailed Derek Yak. I mean, do you prefer now, if you're going to do that over, would you be sending email, or would you be trying to bridge that contact on LinkedIn?
If I had a person's email address, I might shoot them an email and just get into their inbox. But getting a person's email address isn't always that easy. Although nowadays you can find, it's not that difficult to find either.
Yeah.
But I often find, like, I bump into people that I think might be useful contacts on LinkedIn because we're in the same group, or they've made a comment on a post, and I'm sort of like, hey, that's kind of quite interesting. Let me get in touch with that person. Or just in terms of just generally searching for people. Like, I've just recently tried to break into the space of AI and healthcare, and it's not my background. I don't have any network in that space, so I'm kind of almost starting from scratch. But doing a quick search on LinkedIn, and I can see a whole bunch of people that are interested in the space and what they're posting, and I can reach out to them. And so it lets you kind of break into circles that you might not have any inroads in the first place, if that makes sense.
But by the way, we've got a couple of students doing AI in education, in training students, and AI also in chronic disease management. So glad
Put
you
them in
mentioned
touch. Put them in touch with me.
that. So I'll definitely link you up because they're
Can I
getting
give a little advert? I've just started a blog called AI and Health. It's at aiandhealth.com. And
Great.
I'm accepting anybody that wants to write for it. Similar, I'm basically following your model, Courtney.
Corey, that's a blog approach
And
to
the blog
building.
approach, it's got to work. It worked for Courtney. It's got to work for me.
I love that idea, Greg. Really good. Actually, you've reminded me one thing I want to share as well. So sometimes when we think about networking and building our network, we think about going and finding new contacts. One thing that's also really important I want to emphasize is strengthening and crystallizing the relationships with your existing contacts. I think this is where that human touch is so valuable. One thing that served me incredibly well was something very simple. It drove my parents completely mad at the time. Is that right around Christmas every year, I started noticing my parents started getting lots of cards. And I thought, well, hang on, wait a second. I'm going to send some physical snail mail cards, just holiday cards, to everybody in my network and just express gratitude for the relationship I've had with them. That year, reflect on things we've done, things we might be doing, a reminder to them of how good our relationship is, but also just that personal touch that so few people get anything in snail mail. It took me a while to write these cards, but and that's what drove my parents crazy because they wanted me home for the holidays. But and I can't quantify how much it's mattered, but when I came back later to ask for a recommendation letter, or if I needed to get insights on a manuscript or something, I'm 100% convinced that
Yeah.
those little
Mm.
personal touches that I did that were unique, that set me apart from the other students and maybe other people in their network, really mattered. And some of them I would be amazed. They'd send me. I had one, George Lynn, who was the director of PAHO at the time, sent me some books he had written on philosophy and wanted to get on and meet me for coffee and have a chat. And it just really grew. I mean, do either of you have any tips? What do you do when you think about networking? How do you strengthen the bonds with your existing network?
I will. I'll just jump right in there before. Part of that, I think what that example you just gave is amazing. Like, just do something really personable that demonstrates that you've taken some additional trouble. Like, so to write something and send it in snail mail, that takes, you had to think about it. You had to actually come up with something that was genuinely connected specifically to that person and make the effort of posting it. That sends a very strong message that they're important to you. And I think that's, we're very social beings. Like, we've evolved over millions of years to be extremely sociable, and people respond to that. There's a very primal, natural response to that. So that's interesting, David, and I might copy that. You might get a postcard from me at Christmas time or something.
I think I've sent out many more postcards than I've got.
But one of the things I would say, where things get difficult is where your network starts becoming too big, right? So it's you hit a point where your problem isn't trying to find people to network with. Your problem is managing this kind of cohort of names, and you start forgetting who's what and what's important where. And I keep a little CRM. So CRM is what is customer relationships manager. That's something that gets used in sort of the sales world. But I use ClickUp, which you can use for all sorts of things. And like built into ClickUp, you can create a little CRM. But what it means is I've got a list of organizations, and with each and a list of people, and these things are joined up in a kind of relational database. So I can go to an organization and see which people in that organization I'm in contact with, or I can go to just a person and I can see what organization and their email addresses are there, and contact details, and then any notes about them are in there, and I can categorize them with different labels, and so I'm doing that now just so that I don't lose the run of the different kinds of people that I might want to be in contact with for different reasons, and some of the history of the relationship with them, because I might not be in touch with them. For a good example, sorry to just keep harping on about the AI and health story, but I got interested in AI and health just before the COVID-19 pandemic. And I did a whole lot of networking and got in touch with people. Hey, let's get into the space. Then COVID-19 came along, and professionally, I just had to lean into that 100%. It was 7 days a week for 2 years, didn't do anything else. Pandemic softened, and I was like, let me start thinking about AI and health again. And I had this very neatly organized CRM with all the people that I'd been in touch with and who they were and what they were doing and why we were in contact. And I just picked up where we left off and started shooting emails and saying, hey, I'm starting a blog. remember me, like, let's do this. And it all just picked up again. So, keeping that record, being organized. And I'm not a terribly organized person, but this is one space that I have made an effort.
I really like that idea. It's definitely, I haven't imagined myself with a CRM. Again, some of these tools feel so business oriented and outside research. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. One easy way to do it in your email is when you get an email from people in different contacts, you can tag those emails
Yep.
with different identifiers. I might not have gone so far as an Excel spreadsheet, but Greg, if you do have a CRM that you recommend, let us know about that after. I'll link it to the video so that we can share it to people if anybody's interested in setting up their own library. I mean, I remember the network when I was doing some intern work in Congress, and a senator I was working with, I asked, well, what are your tricks for getting money for diabetes? And he's like, aha. And he pulled out he had this card network of all the other senators. And in that network, he knew everybody in Congress who had a family member who had diabetes. And he knew that those were the ones to contact. But he had very cleverly organized his network with that kind of potential energy that if and when needed, he could tap into and know where to go. And I thought that was
Very clever.
extremely clever. Courtney, I think you were going to jump in and add too. Didn't want to.
Yeah, no. I'm just so glad you guys are talking about this, because I think I'm at that point where my network has reached a sort of feeling like max capacity. Like I can't hold on to everyone now anymore. And so I'm over here taking a lot of notes of everything you're saying. Yeah, but again, I'll come back to Twitter again. This is sort of how I give a nod to some people. Like we haven't been in touch in a long time, but sometimes if I find an interesting post or they've written something, just tagging them on Twitter, like, hi, I'm still here. We're still good. That's been so far my strategy. But like I said, I'm in that point now where I'm struggling a little bit with keeping in touch with everyone I feel like I need to be keeping in touch with.
I like that idea. That's actually something I think I would try to use, because every now and then the context you don't want them to get dusty and moldy in a corner, and abandoned, but just kind of a general note. I don't really like, sometimes people send out emails to their networks of, look at my new paper, look at all my new things. That tends to rub me personally a little bit the wrong way. But I do like that, just the kind of maybe even just a very human check-in or touch. Hey, it's been a while. How are things going? You were working on this. I mean, Greg, do you do that? Do you dip into your CRM and every now and then have a reminder to yourself, hey, it's been 6 months, I need to check in with so-and-so?
I do that. Yeah, I do that. I mean, I'm probably less kind of systematic about it than kind of really hitting a 6-month period and sort of saying, oh, I need to kind of keep that relationship alive. But I know some people are literally that kind of organized. But I am conscious of the fact that if you haven't been in contact with someone for a certain period of time, you lose a bit of momentum in that relationship. Yeah. And so there definitely are. And I think back, when I did my master's degree, another great networking opportunity, right? All of the colleagues that were in my class during my master's program, we still, not all of us, I mean, we've got a WhatsApp group and we're kind of in contact, but there's a small group within that for whatever reasons I've stayed in contact with, and those have turned out to be really useful contacts. But it takes that little bit of extra work, right? So I will deliberately every now and again, without having a real reason to do it, but there'll be just a quick hey, how you doing? Is everything good? How's your family? Keep in touch. No professional thing. There's no ask. I'm not just keeping in touch. We know each other. I know you got kids. I've got kids. How are your kids? Just keep that. We're human beings and we're good friends. But professionally, there's also a lot of overlap. And then when there's something important professionally to talk about, that's a strong, solid relationship. And let me also just be clear. These are people that I'm not doing that necessarily just with a professional objective, like, oh, I'm keeping in touch and asking you about your kids because I might want to use you down the line for, they're people that I like and I really want to know if their kids are well. But it's all part of the same thing, really.
I like that a lot. It's so important to genuinely care. I mean, to really listen, care about others is. I mean, it's indispensable. That it's central to a good relationship with anybody. But like dating, as you said, have to genuinely care, and I really like that because I was just thinking as we're talking, oh, well, maybe I could put an alert on my of all my co-authors whenever an article comes out, but that's not really enough because what you're talking about is something much more intimate and something more personal. One thing that I've found challenging over the years is I might develop professional colleagues and we write papers together, but I didn't do enough to really crystallize that relationship and take it to where it was infused with social meaning, this idea in sociology of kind of embeddedness of that relationship. So you embed that relationship, infuse it with more meaning than just a work connection.
Yeah.
Now that can be thorny. You can run into some brambles. We want to make sure you do that in the right way. But
Yeah.
I really like what you're saying there, and I think that over time is a mistake I've made. Courtney, I want to come over to you, and then I want to take a couple questions from people who are watching.
Yeah, I was just thinking that some really good advice that I got once was that, like, if you're writing to somebody for a recommendation, let's say, or they're acting as a reference for you for a job. Now you know you're not shortlisted for that job, you didn't get the job. I think it was recommended to me once to do this, to write back to that person and say, "Hi, thanks so much for the recommendation. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. But like, yeah, let's see with the next one. Fingers crossed." I think it's important, to let yourself be a little bit vulnerable with people too, and like let them into your life. So it's important also to care about other people's life, but then you should let them in also to yours. And I think that it really helps build the relationship if you can do that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
It's really, really smart. Again, I think it's that reciprocity we talked about. That it's both ways that they start investing in you, you invest back, and the relationship builds that way. I really like that. Let me take a couple questions from the group. Some people have been saying here. I just want to point out that they've really appreciated this session. Also because it's real. I remember when I was at Yale School of Public Health as a student, we would have some professional networkers come in and tell us how to network, and it just didn't feel kind of like it was real, like our lives in the field. There's one good question here that I'd like to take. And Greg, you might be good for answering this. I wonder if you have any advice on how to start networking when you're switching fields from being a local doctor to getting in global health. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, now I understand the question because I've kind of like spread myself into a couple of little different corners of my intellectual life. I've landed up doing a little bit of kind of trying to wangle my way into a side of things that I might not be as familiar. Just one or two things. Firstly, I've already sort of said that the LinkedIn is a great place to find people and to reach out to them. So use that. The Courtney approach to starting a blog so that you are visible in the space, I think is a great idea. And I've sort of stumbled across a similar strategy. It doesn't have to be a blog. I think a blog's a nice idea because it's easy to get going. Yeah. Could be a podcast, could be a YouTube channel, could be a newsletter. It could be anything, but just do something so that you're adding value to that community and you're giving them a reason to want to be in contact with you. The nice thing about a blog or YouTube or a podcast is you can invite people to participate. So you've got now an excuse to get in touch. I'm not just emailing you or contacting you to say hi, but I'm actually coming with some sort of proposition, and that gives the conversation some sort of reason. And they might not have time, and they might not be interested, but at least you're on their radar, and you've had an excuse to get in touch. And then the nice thing about doing something like that is that you can quite quickly, even though your starting point is you're new to the field, get some credibility. I remember, and this can translate into jobs, by the way, because I remember when I was working at the WHO, I was expanding my team and we were employing people, and we had two candidates that were equally impressive. But one of them, in her spare time, had started a blog on access to medicine, just in her own time, and demonstrated a genuine personal interest in the subject. So this wasn't just professional; this was something. And Ali Grant, if you're watching, shout out to you. She got the job, it just demonstrated such a genuine connection with the subject matter. She was adding value of her own volition. She was genuinely passionate about it, and that was the clincher. So, I've never been a blogger. I'm new to it, but I'm now suddenly a fan.
I mean, take some of those ideas myself. I mean, one I'd add to the blog is some of you can be in a position. I don't like so much when grad students organize conferences because it can be a whole lot of administrative work. But I like the blog because it's something substantive, something you'd be proud of in your field. I also like trying to organize a special issue for the journal. That may be where you publish a lot,
Yeah.
especially get in contact with the editors. Sometimes they do have some themes and they do want that extra help. I mean, Greg, is that something you've done? Special issues with globalization and health.
Yeah, and we've done lots of special issues, and it's
Yeah.
been really good. Yeah, we love doing them. It's been a nice thing to do in the journal because you kind of gather together a really sort of core group of people that are specifically interested in that. And I mean, the question that popped up on the screen, and I sorry I didn't see the name of the person that asked it, but he was talking about moving from clinical medicine into global health.
Let me put it back up here. Yeah.
And global health itself is very, very broad.
Yeah.
So you could start a blog on global health. There's nothing wrong with that, but you could stumble across a very specific interest there within, and then suddenly you might find like no one's got a blog on that. You know, you might be the first, and that's actually interesting. You can kind of like make a name for yourself.
I like that. That's a really good suggestion, and it worked fabulously for Courtney as well. That was it's a really interesting strategy, not one that I'd ever thought about. I got one more question, and then I'm going to move to a recap. And I think this one's really good because one of the most important networks you've got to get right is with your supervisor. And I have so many students coming to me saying they're having trouble communicating with their supervisor and get in a bad cycle of not communicating enough. The relationship breaks down. Courtney, Greg, what do you suggest for Gideon here? What would you advise me to do if I want to connect with my supervisor after a very long time of not communicating?
Yeah, I guess it would depend why it's been so long first. And yeah, sort of what your relationship is like. So if it had been me, and like say, when I was, maybe you're away on parental leave or something, then I think the best way is just, again, a short email to ask to meet up for a coffee or something like that. Or if you had something maybe going on in your personal life. If something happened with the relationship, yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? I'm trying to think of the reasons why that you would be out of communication for so long with the supervisor.
You're getting to the root causes. There's something that's not gone right here. Yeah, Greg.
I mean, there's two possible scenarios here. The one is that there's some sort of pathology, right? Something's gone wrong and you're not in contact for some sort of reason, and that needs to be addressed somehow. And sometimes the best way of addressing that is just kind of, but I'm not a relationship counselor, so maybe I'm not the best person to give advice there. But more often than not, there's nothing that's really gone wrong. It's just that life has been busy. Everybody's been kind of doing their thing, and you've not been in touch for a while. And I would say just take the plunge, reach out, say hi. We've not been in touch for a while, and I'd really love to connect in. And I'd say 99% of the time, the person on the other end of that email or phone call is going to be like, "Yeah, great idea. I was thinking the same thing. Let's connect in. That's a great idea." Mostly, I mean, we're very sociable animals. Mostly people would be glad to reconnect and to redevelop that relationship. It's important to them too. So I would say just go for it, unless there's some sort of problem, in which case fix the problem.
Yeah, exactly. So my general advice to a lot of students, I think sometimes the tendency is if the rapport with supervisor is not building or going well, sometimes students have a tendency to just withdraw, and that tends most of the time to make the communication and the relationship worse. So I really like a grad strategy. Almost treat it as no big deal and just get back in touch. Hey, want to share with you the progress I've been making and really be valuable to get your feedback right now. And I like to be able to come with something in hand, if that's the case. If it's an old student, somebody mentioned I love old students contacting me. That's fantastic. I love that as well. I love hearing. Courtney said about the I wrote a recommendation letter, and sometimes I don't even know what happened to the people I wrote a reference for. Get back in touch with them. Let them know your wins and your successes, and express gratitude. As a professor, I love that. So I don't think you can ever go wrong on that. I'm gonna do a quick recap, and then I just want to come back Greg, Courtney, for any final thoughts from you. But my recap is we've covered a lot of really great things and strategies that you can take home and put into practice today. I hope we've all convinced you that much of our success is not just how brilliant we are as researchers, but steady, consistent investments in our network and nurturing and sustaining that network. What you need to do, you need to have a plan. Not something you just stumble into. That can be okay, but you can do better. It's partly a numbers game. So be aware that you may have to make lots of contacts that these plant seeds. Don't be afraid. If you do have signs of imposter syndrome, even if you're an introvert, there's ways to deal with this and ways to conquer it. We've given you some strategies here through LinkedIn and others that can be great ways to make cold approaches. The second tip is to have something to offer to your contacts. And we had a lot of great suggestions from Greg, Courtney about setting up a blog, or other fora that can bring people together for a strategic reason. This is especially important even in your emails to not just ask for a lot of things, but to make it about them, to really know who they are, be specific, and why you're getting in touch with them. The same thing goes to have something to offer is to engage. If you're going to conferences, to engage, that can be with people who are at your own level, but also others. Have a question. Do your homework. Come prepared and be ready. And the other thing that I think is really critical for new contacts, but also existing contacts, really important to crystallize and strengthen the bonds you already have, is to build reciprocity, something I've said a lot. Come to people with a human touch, show that you care, let them also be able to invest in you and have a part of your life, and treat people like a real person, not just a business relationship that you're trying to squeeze some benefit out of. And so that human contact and human touch is also important, especially as we're in a digital online era where we can really feel isolated and alienated from each other. So I want to come back around and final, Greg, Courtney, final best tips and thoughts for everybody. Oh, Greg, we just lost you on sound for a second.
Oh, got my sound. I think my final piece of advice is just remember the person you're trying to reach out to and network with, they're also a human being and they're likely to want to be in touch with you too. And if you think that, if you're not sure that they're convinced of that, then convince them. But, they're humans, we're sociable. This is just about like kind of tapping into that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would say it's just interesting how we've all taken sort of different paths to this. And so I would just emphasize to find a way that works for you. So, Greg and I talked about doing the blogs, but maybe that it just completely turns you off and that's not your thing. Like, then don't force yourself into something. I don't think that's comfortable. Again, like we had the question about the introvert, like there's ways to do it as you already are comfortable with. If you're an extrovert, great, raise your hand during the middle of the conference and ask your questions and talk with colleagues. If you're an introvert, wait until afterwards, prepare your question in advance. So I would just say, just do what you're doing. Do what is most comfortable for you intentionally.
I love that. Just want to, we've got lots of people in the comments saying thanks. If some of you are on Team Replay watching later, Courtney, Greg, and I always come back to your comments. We'll get back in touch with you. So do let us know if you're on Team Replay. Send us your comments and questions. We will get back to you. Every Friday, we have our Fast Track Live. Greg and I have been doing more collaborations, which has been fantastic. Courtney's going to be joining us more regularly. If there's some topics that you'd like to cover, this is, again, a judgment-free open space that we set up because we found so many grad students are bright and talented, but they just weren't getting the support they need to really thrive, especially around some of these softer skills like networking, but also some of the skills that we don't teach enough about writing, preparing cover letters, applying for jobs. So if there's a topic that you would love to see us cover, let us know in the comments, and we will create a training and support that you're personally going to find helpful here at the Fast Track program every Friday. 4 o'clock Central Eastern Time, 3 o'clock UK, 9 a.m. Central US. Greg, Courtney, thanks so much for joining us. I hope we can do it again very, very soon together.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, David. It's been great. All the best. Great to meet you, Courtney.